Nathaniel Whitmore slammed the parlor door so hard the china rattled 3 rooms away. "Send her home," he said. "Send them all home." His grandmother stood in the hallway with her hands folded and her chin lifted, watching him the way she always had, like she already knew something he didn't. "All 17 of them," she said quietly. "And you never once asked a single one her name." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because deep down, Nathaniel Whitmore already knew she was right. If this story moves you, hit that subscribe button and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1817 sat heavy over Shenandoah Valley, like a wool blanket nobody asked for. The kind of heat that made horses skittish and tempers short and polite conversation feel like hard labor. And in a county where everybody knew everybody else's business before breakfast, the name Nathaniel Whitmore carried more weight than the August sun. People said it the way they said things they both feared and admired. Whitmore land and Whitmore money, Whitmore name, 300 acres of Virginia bottomland, a timber operation up in the hills, a merchant warehouse down in the valley town, and a house, Lord, that house, sitting on a rise above the river like it had been placed there by God's own hand to remind everyone below exactly where they stood. 20 rooms, 4 chimneys. Columns you could see from the road a full mile out. People pointed at it when they drove past. Mothers pointed at it when they talked to their daughters, and daughters looked at it the way certain women look at certain things. Not with love exactly, but with a very particular kind of calculation that dressed itself up as admiration. Nathaniel Whitmore was 34 years old, unmarried, and, according to every matchmaking grandmother in a 50-mile radius, the greatest unsolved problem in the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. He had refused 17 women. Not unkindly. That was what made it worse in a way. There were no scenes, no cruelties, no public humiliations. He simply looked at each one, spoke a few measured words, and then quietly, firmly, finally, told his grandmother Margaret that this one was not right either. 17 times. And 17 times, Margaret Whitmore had sat in her chair by the east window, folded her hands in her lap, and said nothing. Because Margaret had learned, across 81 years of living, that some kinds of grief required silence more than they required solutions. She had watched her grandson come home from the war with Tecumseh's Confederation, a quieter man than the one who left. She had watched him bury his father and assume the weight of the estate at 26, with a steadiness that impressed everyone who saw it and worried her deeply, because a man that steady at 26 has usually decided something the rest of the world doesn't know yet. She had watched him smile less, work more, build more fences, literal ones, across the property lines, and invisible ones, around himself. Until the man who lived inside the Whitmore name felt increasingly like a stranger she was sharing a house with. So she had tried to find him a wife. Not for the estate, not for the family name, not for the society columns in the Richmond papers. For him, because Margaret knew her grandson in the way that grandmothers know things, not through what he said, but through what he never said. And what Nathaniel Whitmore never said was this: "I am lonely." But she heard it anyway, every single time. Samuel Whitmore, Nathaniel's younger brother by 7 years, had a gift for being in the wrong place at the right time. He was 27, unmarried himself, and possessed of the kind of easy charm that Nathaniel had apparently been born without or had carefully trained himself out of. Samuel laughed readily. He remembered names. He sat with the farmhands at the end of long days and talked about nothing important for hours, and somehow everyone felt better for it. He also watched his brother the way a man watches weather, not because he can change it, but because he wants some warning before the storm comes down. That August morning, he found Nathaniel in the stables before dawn. Not an unusual thing. Nathaniel was often in the stables before dawn, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, a particular kind of stillness that Samuel had learned to read, that made him lean against the stall post and stay quiet for a moment. "Grandmother's got someone coming today," Samuel said finally. Nathaniel didn't look up from the bridle he was working on. "I know. She told you?" She didn't have to. He set the bridle down, picked it up again. She had that look at supper last night, the one where she's already decided something, and she's just waiting for the rest of us to catch up. Samuel smiled a little. She did have that look. Who is it this time? Don't know. She wouldn't say. Samuel paused. Which is different, she usually says. Nathaniel finally looked up. Something moved across his face. Not hope exactly. Too much disappointment behind his eyes for that. More like the ghost of a question he'd stopped asking. It doesn't matter, he said. Tell grandmother I'll be civil. She's not asking you to be civil, Nathaniel. She's asking you to be... I said I'll be civil. He set the bridle down again, this time for good, and walked out of the stable into the early morning without looking back. Samuel watched him go. He thought about saying something more. He decided against it. Some conversations required a different kind of timing. The young women Nathaniel had refused were not bad women. That was the thing nobody seemed to want to talk about. They were, every one of them, exactly what Virginia society said a woman ought to be. Well-dressed, well-spoken. From good families with respectable names and reasonable fortunes. They knew how to pour tea and conduct conversation and sit with their hands folded in the right way. They had come into this parlor, his parlor, or his grandmother's parlor, depending on how you counted things. And they had looked around with eyes that could not help themselves. Eyes that counted the candlesticks. That measured the distance between the fireplace and the east wall. That rested on the portrait above the mantel and recognized its value, even if they couldn't have named the painter. He had watched it happen 17 times, and every time, something in him closed like a shutter pulled against a winter storm. He was not blind to what he had. He was not ungrateful. His father had built something real on this land, and his grandfather before him, and he had expanded it with 10 years of his own sweat and judgment, and occasionally brutal decision-making. The estate was real. The wealth was real. He held it in his hands the way a man holds anything he's bled for. But he was not the estate. He was not the house. He was not the 300 acres, or the timber operation, or the warehouse down in the valley. How was a man who had watched his father die alone in this house, because his mother had loved the idea of the Whitmore name more than she'd ever loved the Whitmore who gave it to her. A man who had decided, somewhere in his 20s, that he would rather spend his life in honest solitude than build something false with someone who saw right through him to the property behind him. So he refused. And the valley talked. Too proud, too particular, too cold. They said it quietly, in parlors and at church socials and over back fences, the way people talk about things they want to criticize but can't quite condemn outright. Nathaniel heard some of it. He let it slide off. But in the stables at 5 a.m, working leather with his hands because it was the only thing that helped him think. In those hours, he knew the truth that he would not have said out loud to anyone. He was tired, not of the estate, not of the work, not of Virginia, or the valley, or the weight of the Whitmore name. I was tired of being looked at like he was a destination. The woman arrived at 10:30. Not in a fine carriage, which was the first thing Samuel noticed. A regular hired wagon from the valley, the kind that transported goods and ordinary people from one place to another without any ceremony about it. She climbed down without waiting for help, which was the second thing Samuel noticed. She was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair pinned back practically, and a blue dress that was clean and well kept, but had clearly been worn many times before. She carried a worn leather bag over one shoulder, the kind used for documents or books, and she was looking up at the house. But not the way the others had looked at it. Samuel had watched 17 women look at this house. He knew the look by now. The slight widening of the eyes, the almost imperceptible intake of breath, the moment of calculation that crossed over into something that wanted to be longing. This woman was not doing that. She was looking at the house the way a person looks at a problem they've been asked to solve. Thoughtfully, professionally, like she was taking inventory. Then she looked away. Down at the grounds, at the kitchen garden, at the old oak near the south wall that had been there since before his grandfather's time. And then she turned and looked directly at Samuel, who was standing near the fence post doing a very poor job of pretending he hadn't been watching her arrive. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was clear, not loud, but clear. "I'm looking for Mrs. Margaret Whitmore. My name is Eleanor Bennett. She's expecting me." Samuel tipped his hat automatically. "Miss Bennett." "Yes, ma'am. I'll take you in." "Thank you." She fell into step beside him, without any of the hesitation or performance that usually accompanied a woman's first arrival at a house of this size. "I understand she has a significant library that requires cataloging." Samuel blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The library." She glanced at him sideways. "That is why she wrote to me? About the cataloging work?" "Right," Samuel said, because something was becoming clear to him that had not been clear before. "Yes, of course, the library." She nodded, satisfied, and kept walking. Samuel looked back at the empty yard where the wagon had left, then forward at Eleanor Bennett's back, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt like things were about to become interesting. Nathaniel met her in the hallway by accident. He'd come in from the South Fields earlier than expected, a fence line issue that had resolved faster than anticipated, and he was still in his work clothes, dusty from the morning, not remotely prepared for company. Eleanor Bennett was coming from the direction of the library with his grandmother, their voices low and engaged in a conversation he caught the tail end of. "At least 400 volumes from what I can see," Eleanor was saying. "The condition is better than I expected, though some of the older texts near the east window will need special care. Do you know how long they've been stored without proper ventilation?" "My husband's collection," Margaret said warmly. 40 years at least. Some of his father's books as well. We've always known we should do something more organized with them." "There's a Jefferson Agricultural Almanac from 1795 in there," Eleanor said. And there was something in her voice, not excitement exactly, but a kind of quiet seriousness that was close to reverence. "I wasn't expecting that. It's genuinely remarkable." "Is it worth something?" Margaret asked. "Historically, yes. To someone who understands what it means, very much so." They rounded the corner and saw Nathaniel. He watched the moment happen the way you watch something you can't prevent. Margaret's face shifted into an expression of theatrical innocence that he had learned to distrust deeply over 34 years. And the woman beside her, Eleanor Bennett, looked at him the way she had apparently looked at the house, directly, without any particular performance. "Nathaniel," Margaret said, "you're home early. I'd like you to meet Miss Eleanor Bennett. She's come to organize the library. Miss Bennett, this is my grandson, Nathaniel Whitmore." Eleanor looked at him for a moment. He waited for it. The slight adjustment in posture, the brightening of the eyes that had nothing to do with genuine feeling, the particular reorientation that happened when a woman understood she was in the presence of Nathaniel Whitmore specifically, and not just some dusty man who'd come in from the fields. Eleanor Bennett said, "How do you do?" in the same tone she had used to discuss the Jefferson Almanac. Then she looked back at his grandmother. "I'll need proper cloth for the bindings that are beginning to crack. And if it's possible to get natural light into the room for a few hours each day, it would help considerably with the identification process." Margaret nodded. "Whatever you need, dear. Nathaniel, would you make sure Henry opens the south shutters in the library each morning?" "Yes," Nathaniel said. He was still looking at Eleanor Bennett. She was not looking at him. She had already moved on to the next item of business. At supper that evening, Samuel waited until the biscuits were passed, and the silence had settled into a comfortable shape before he said anything. "She's different," he said. Nathaniel cut his meat without looking up. "Who?" "Miss Bennett, the woman grandmother brought in for the library." "She's a librarian." "She's a cataloger, I think, technically. She corrected me on that earlier." Samuel poured himself more water. "But that's not what I meant." "What did you mean?" Samuel considered how to say it. "She looked at you like you were someone who'd tracked mud in from the fields." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then, "I had tracked mud in from the fields. You know what I mean." Nathaniel set down his fork. He picked it up again. He said nothing. Across the table, Margaret was eating her supper with a very particular quality of serenity that Samuel recognized as the look his grandmother wore when she had already won an argument that no one else realized had started yet. "She's here for the library," Nathaniel said finally. "That's all." "Of course," Margaret said, sweetly, completely. Samuel looked at his grandmother. Margaret looked at her supper. He thought about saying more. He let it go. The second day, Eleanor arrived before any of them were fully awake. The cook, Mrs. Patton, found her in the library at 6:30 in the morning, already at work, a candle burning beside her on the table, and a notebook open in her hand. "Lord above, child," Mrs. Patton said, stopping in the doorway. "The house isn't even properly opened yet." "I knocked," Eleanor said, without stopping what she was doing. "The back door was unlocked. I didn't want to wake anyone. You could have waited on the porch. I've got a great deal of work to do." She looked up then, and there was something direct and unapologetic in her expression that Mrs. Patton wasn't sure she'd seen in a young woman in some time. "I'll be out of everyone's way in here. You won't even know I'm about." Mrs. Patton looked at her, looked at the stacks of books already sorted into 3 distinct piles around the table, looked at the careful notations in the open notebook. "I'll bring you coffee," she said. "That would be very kind," Eleanor said. "Thank you." Mrs. Patton went back to the kitchen. She told the kitchen girl what she'd seen, and by mid-morning, the story had traveled, the way stories do in a house, from the kitchen to the stables, and up to where Nathaniel was meeting with his foreman about the fence line. He didn't say anything when he heard it. He just nodded and moved on to the next item of business. But that evening, he walked past the library door on the way to his study. The south shutters had been opened. The late light was coming in at a low angle, throwing the shelves into golden shadow. Eleanor Bennett was standing at the far end of the room, with a very old book open in her hands, reading with a quality of attention that had nothing performed about it. She didn't hear him, or if she did, she gave no sign. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He wasn't sure how long. Then he walked on to his study. He sat at his desk. He looked at the papers in front of him. He thought about the quality of attention she gave to a book. He picked up his pen. He set it down. He thought, with a clarity that surprised him. "I cannot remember the last time someone looked at anything in this house like it was genuinely worth looking at." And then he went back to work. Because that was what he did. That was what he had always done. But the thought stayed with him. It sat in the corner of everything else for the rest of the evening, quiet and inconvenient, and refused to leave. On the 4th day, he went into the library. Not for any particular reason he was prepared to name. He needed to find a land survey document that might have been misfiled in his grandfather's papers, which were, in fact, stored in the library. That was a reasonable explanation. A complete explanation. He found the land survey within 4 minutes of looking. He stayed for another 20. Eleanor was at the far table, her back partly to him, working through a stack of correspondence that had apparently been stored between the pages of a bound journal. She was sorting it, setting pieces aside, making notes. She had not acknowledged his arrival beyond a brief, "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," delivered without turning around when he came through the door. He found himself looking at the shelves. His grandfather's law books, his father's collection of surveying texts, 3 volumes on agricultural methods he didn't recognize. "Those 3, he said, without entirely deciding to. "The ones on the left, I don't recognize them." Eleanor glanced over at the shelf he was indicating. "The agricultural texts?" "Yes. They're a collection on soil management, from around 1800, 1801, 1803. They're actually quite good." She turned back to her correspondence. "Whoever purchased them had good judgment about practical science. My father." She paused in her sorting. A brief pause. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. Straightforward. Not performed. It was 8 years ago. That doesn't necessarily change the weight of it. He looked at her back. She had already gone back to work. "No," he said. "It doesn't." A silence settled between them. Not an uncomfortable one, which surprised him. He was not a man who was comfortable with silence in company. He usually filled it, or left. He did neither. "The Jefferson Almanac," he said. "From 1795. You mentioned it to my grandmother. It's on the preservation shelf." She nodded toward the east wall, where a separate table held a small collection of items she had apparently flagged. "Would you like to see it?" He walked over. The almanac was small, the leather worn to softness. He opened it carefully, the way she had apparently taught him to without saying anything, by watching how she handled the books. The handwriting inside the front cover stopped him. "Thomas Jefferson, Monticello, June 1794. For the consideration of good farming men." "It was a gift," Eleanor said from across the room. She hadn't looked up. "He gave several to farmers he respected. The inscription is what makes it significant. Anyone could have a copy of the almanac. Not anyone could have that one." Nathaniel closed it with the same care, set it back. "Miss Bennet," he said. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore." "Why did you take this work?" She was quiet for a moment, long enough that he thought she might not answer. "Because someone needs to do it," she said, "and I'm good at it." "There's no other reason?" She turned then, looked at him with that direct, unperformed gaze. "What other reason were you expecting, Mr. Whitmore?" He didn't answer. She held his eyes for a moment, then turned back to her work. "I'm trying to find some order in what's here," she said. "These books have been waiting a long time for someone to pay proper attention to them. That seems worth doing." He stood there, in his own library, with land survey documents under his arm and 80 years of his family's collected knowledge arranged around him in careful piles by a woman he had known 4 days. He thought, no one has ever said anything like that about something in this house before. He thought, she is talking about books. He thought, I know she is talking about books. He left the library. He went back to his study. He stared at the land survey for 20 minutes without reading a word of it. It was Mrs. Patton who told him what was happening in the valley. She didn't mean to. She was relaying household news, the way she always did. He had made it a point to know what moved through his own house, because a man who didn't know what moved through his house didn't actually own it. He was just living in it. And she said it as part of a longer list of things. And folks in town have got their notions about Miss Bennet, of course. He set down his pen. What notions? Mrs. Patton had the look of a woman who now wished she'd stopped 3 sentences sooner. Just talk, Mr. Whitmore. You know how they are. Tell me what they're saying. She folded her hands, unfolded them. Some folks think she's only here for what she can get out of the family. That a woman like her, from her kind of circumstances, she wouldn't take a job like this without an eye toward a different kind of position. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. And what do you think, Mrs. Patton? She met his gaze steadily. She had worked for this family for 19 years. I think she was here before 6 in the morning on her second day, and she spent the whole of it arguing with a stack of mold-damaged Latin texts about whether they were worth saving. That's not what a woman on the make looks like in my experience. Nathaniel said nothing for a moment. Who is saying this? Harold Mercer brought it up at the dry goods store, from what I understand. His wife passed it along. Harold Mercer, 52, second largest landholder in the county. Had a daughter of marriageable age. Had introduced that daughter to Nathaniel 2 years ago in a manner that could only be described as strategic. Nathaniel had refused, politely, finally. He picked up his pen. Thank you, Mrs. Patton, he said. She left. He sat very still at his desk. I was thinking about Eleanor Bennet arriving before 6 in the morning. He was thinking about the way she had said, I'm good at it, without apology or false modesty. He was thinking about a woman who argued with mold-damaged Latin texts about whether they were worth saving. And he was thinking about Harold Mercer, who had never once in his life looked at anything without first calculating what it was worth to him. He picked up a fresh sheet of paper. He did not write to Harold Mercer. He wrote to his grandmother instead. Grandmother, regarding the matter of Miss Bennet's continued engagement with the library, I believe we should ensure that her work is completed with every appropriate support this household can provide. She is, as far as I can determine, exactly what she says she is. N. He folded it, had it delivered to the east sitting room, where his grandmother sat in the evenings. An hour later, a note came back. "My darling boy, I know. M." He read it twice. He sat back in his chair. He thought about a woman who looked at a Jefferson almanac like it was worth looking at, and at a wealthy landowner like he was just a man who'd tracked mud in from the fields. And somewhere in the middle of a summer that had felt, until 4 days ago, like a season he was simply waiting to get through, Nathaniel Whitmore felt something shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, just shift. The way the first real thing shifts when it arrives. The note Nathaniel sent his grandmother on the fourth evening was not something he thought about again until the following morning, when he came downstairs to find Eleanor Bennet already seated at the breakfast table. Not in the dining room, in the kitchen. Seated at the long work table where the household staff took their meals, drinking coffee with Mrs. Patton and talking about bread, not about anything else. Just bread. Specifically, whether the flour from the new mill down the valley was any good for biscuits, or whether Mrs. Patton was right that it ran too fine and dried everything out. Eleanor had an opinion on this. A fairly strong one, delivered without apology. "The finer grind absorbs differently," she was saying, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup. "You'd have to adjust the liquid or the fat. It's not the flour's fault, it's that the recipe assumes a coarser grain." Mrs. Patton gave her the look she reserved for people who had just said something she agreed with but hadn't expected to. "That's exactly what I told Mr. Whitmore's mother in 1803, and she thought I was making excuses." "You weren't making excuses, you were doing chemistry," Mrs. Patton laughed. "A real one, the kind that didn't happen often in this house before 8 in the morning." And then she looked up and saw Nathaniel in the doorway, and the laughter settled back into its usual professional distance. Eleanor turned to look at him. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." Same tone as always. Like finding him in doorways was a thing she had filed away under expected inconveniences and moved on from without much additional thought. "Miss Bennet," he said, "you're early again." "The light is better in the morning." She stood, picked up her coffee, and moved toward the hall that led to the library. "I'll be out of your way." And she was gone. Mrs. Patton was watching him with an expression he chose not to interpret. He sat down at the kitchen table. Not the dining room. The kitchen table, which was not something he had done since he was 12 years old. "Coffee," he said. Mrs. Patton poured it without comment. He drank it in silence and thought about a woman who did chemistry without knowing she was doing it and didn't need anyone's credit for the result. The Valley started talking seriously on the 6th day. Not the quiet, speculative talk that Mrs. Patton had mentioned. Real talk. The kind with teeth. Samuel heard it first at the feed store. He was there picking up an order when Thomas Greer, who was the kind of man who could not hold information inside himself for more than 3 consecutive minutes, leaned over the counter and said, in a voice pitched just low enough to sound like confidence and just loud enough to reach everyone within 8 feet. "Heard Whitmore's grandmother brought in a girl from Staunton. Smart one, they say. Library work, they call it." He paused, loading meaning into the pause the way certain men load bullets. "Real convenient timing, ain't it? What with him refusing every proper lady in the county." Samuel did not change his expression. "Thomas," he said. "You ever actually been inside our library?" Thomas had not. Samuel knew he had not. "Because Miss Bennet," Samuel continued, picking up his receipt from the counter, "is in there at 5:30 in the morning, arguing with a deteriorating Latin manuscript. I've seen it myself, but you go ahead and finish that thought." He walked out. But walking away from talk didn't stop it. Samuel knew that. Walking away from talk never stopped it. It just meant you weren't there to do anything about it when it turned. He went straight home and found Nathaniel at the fence line on the north property, doing work that was technically the foreman's job, but that Nathaniel took on himself when he needed to think. "People are talking," Samuel said. "People always talk." "About Miss Bennet." Nathaniel drove a post without answering. "Nathaniel." "I heard you." "Mercer is behind it. He's telling people she's here to work her way into a better situation. That grandmother brought her in on purpose." Samuel stopped. "He's implying grandmother arranged it. Like a scheme." The post driving stopped. Nathaniel straightened up. He was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when the anger was real, and he was deciding what to do with it. "Has anyone said this to her face?" he asked. "Not that I know of." "Keep it that way." He picked up the next post. "And Samuel." "Yeah." "Tell me exactly what Mercer said." "All of it." Samuel told him. All of it. Nathaniel drove posts for another 20 minutes without speaking. Samuel stood there and let him. When he finally stopped, he said, "She's done nothing to deserve any of this." "No," Samuel agreed. "She hasn't. She came here to work. She's been working. She was here before the sun was up on day 2, and I'll wager she knows more about what's in that library than any of us have known in 30 years. Yes. And Mercer is doing this because I refused his daughter, and this is the form his revenge takes." Nathaniel said it flatly, not as a question. "That's my read on it." Nathaniel was quiet again. Then, "Does she know?" "I don't think so." He nodded. "Set down the post. She needs to know, before she hears it wrong." Samuel blinked. "You're going to tell her?" "Somebody should. Most men in your position would let the staff handle something like that." "Most men in my position," Nathaniel said, "are the reason she's going to hear it eventually anyway." He picked up his gloves. "Where is she now?" "Library, I expect. Where else?" He knocked on the library door, which he had not done before. He had always simply entered his own library, because it was his library, and that had always been sufficient justification. He knocked this time. "Come in," Eleanor said. She was at the table near the window, with 3 open books spread around her and a lamp pulled close, though the afternoon light was still sufficient. She looked up when he entered, and something in his expression must have been readable enough, because she set down her pen. "What is it?" she said. Not alarmed, just direct. He pulled a chair and sat across from her. He didn't frame it or soften it, because he had decided on the walk over that she would not want it framed or softened. "There is talk in the valley about why you're here," he said. "It's being suggested, by at least one man I know the source of, that your employment here was arranged for purposes other than the library." Eleanor was very still. "He's suggesting," Nathaniel continued, because there was no point stopping now, "that my grandmother brought you here as a stratagem, to introduce a woman into this household who I might," he stopped, "said it plain, who I might consider marrying." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Did your grandmother arrange it for that reason?" He had expected several responses. That one surprised him. He stopped. "I don't know. I believe she genuinely wanted the library organized. Whether she had additional reasons." He said it honestly, because she deserved honesty. "She is my grandmother. She has always had additional reasons for everything." Eleanor absorbed this. "And you came to tell me because you should hear it from me before you hear it in a form designed to humiliate you." She looked at him steadily. He looked back. The light from the south window was long and amber. "Mr. Whitmore," she said finally, "do you believe I came here for a husband?" "No," he said, without hesitation. "I don't." "Why not?" I thought about how to answer that. He thought about the pre-dawn arrivals, and the argument with the Latin manuscript, and the conversation about biscuit chemistry, and the way she held the Jefferson Almanac like it was something worth holding. "Because," he said, "you haven't looked at me long enough to form an opinion about whether I'd be worth having." Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile exactly, but in the direction of one. "That's very self-aware of you," she said. "I've had a great deal of practice with women looking at this house instead of me," he said. "I know the difference by now." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry you've had to learn that difference." The way she said it, not with pity, but with something level and real, landed somewhere he hadn't expected anything to land. "What do you want me to do?" he said. "About Mercer." "Nothing," she said. "Miss Bennet." "I said nothing, Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was calm, but there was iron in it. "A woman who cannot manage other people's bad opinions is a woman who cannot manage anything. I did not come here for your protection, And I do not need you to fight a battle. I'm perfectly capable of deciding whether or not to fight myself. She looked at him. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? I did. He understood it completely. He also understood that no one had ever said anything quite like that to him in this room, or possibly in this house. Yes, he said. Good. She picked up her pen. The library will be finished in approximately 4 more weeks. The Mercer family can think what they like for 4 more weeks. I intend to do the work I came here to do. He sat there for a moment. Then he said, I'd like to help. She looked up. With the library, he clarified. There are a number of my grandfather's papers in here I haven't reviewed in years. Some of them may be relevant to your cataloging. He paused. I could be useful. Eleanor Bennet looked at him with that direct, assessing gaze that he was beginning to understand was simply how she looked at things she was deciding the worth of. Can you sit still for long periods of time without needing to be entertained? She asked. He almost smiled. I manage a 300-acre estate. I sit through an extraordinary number of very long conversations about soil drainage. All right, she said. You can stay, but I work in quiet. I prefer quiet, he said. She looked back at her books. Then we'll get along fine. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Not for the whole of each day. The estate did not run itself, but for an hour in the afternoon, sometimes 2. He sat at the far end of the table with his grandfather's papers, sorting through them the way she had shown him, setting aside anything she had flagged as significant and leaving the rest in the proper piles. They worked, mostly, in silence, but it was not the silence of 2 strangers enduring proximity. It was the silence of 2 people who had each, separately, decided that the other one was acceptable company. Occasionally one of them would say something. This survey document, it's dated 1789. Does that belong in the historical correspondence or the property records? Property records. The correspondence pile is for personal letters only. Your grandfather wrote a great deal. He wrote to everyone. He thought letters were how civilization held itself together. A pause. I wasn't wrong. No, Nathaniel said. He wasn't. Short exchanges. Practical. But something was accumulating in them. The way things accumulate when 2 people keep showing up in the same room for the same purpose, and eventually stop pretending the only thing in the room is the work. On the second afternoon of their working together, Eleanor said, without looking up, How old were you when you took over the estate? 26. That's young. My father died suddenly. There wasn't a choice about the timing. She was quiet for a moment. Did you want it? The estate, I mean, at 26. The question surprised him. Not because it was impolite, it wasn't, but because no one had ever asked him that. In 8 years of managing the Whitmore estate, not one person had asked whether he had wanted it. I don't know, he said honestly. I knew it was mine. I knew I could do it. I don't think I ever asked myself whether I wanted it. She looked up at that. Looked at him with that steady, assessing quality. That sounds lonely, she said. He met her eyes. It was. She held his gaze for a moment, then went back to her work. She didn't press further. She didn't try to fix it or soften it or redirect the conversation toward something more comfortable. She just said, I imagine so, quietly, and let the truth of it sit in the room without embarrassment. That was when Nathaniel Whitmore understood, for the first time, that he was in some amount of trouble. Samuel saw it before anyone else named it. He saw it in the particular way Nathaniel walked toward the house in the afternoons. The slight change in pace that happened somewhere around the kitchen garden, as if something inside him was recalibrating. He saw it in the way Nathaniel stopped making his usual evening comments about the estate's problems. Not because the problems had stopped, but because his attention was running somewhere else. Samuel did not say anything. Not yet. He was watching and waiting and trying to determine whether this was the thing he had been hoping for since his brother came back from the war and started building fences around himself, or whether it was going to break on some obstacle he couldn't see yet. Margaret knew. Of course Margaret knew. She always knew. She said nothing either, which was the loudest thing she did. What Samuel had not anticipated was Eleanor. He found her alone in the library one morning when Nathaniel had gone out early with the foreman, and he stood in the doorway long enough to watch her work. And he thought about what Mrs. Patton had said. That's not what a woman on the make looks like. And he thought she was right. And he thought about something else too. He thought, this woman does not know what is happening. Or if she knows, she hasn't decided what to do with the knowing yet. He knocked on the open door. She looked up. May I? He gestured at the chair across from her. Of course. He sat. She went back to work. He watched her work for a moment. Miss Bennet, he said, can I ask you something directly? I prefer direct, she said, without looking up. Do you find my brother difficult? She was quiet for a moment. No. Most people do. Most people haven't tried sitting still with him. She turned a page. He's actually quite easy to be around, once you stop expecting him to perform. Samuel absorbed this. He comes to the library every afternoon. He does. He didn't used to come to the library, not in years. She looked up at that, looked at Samuel with an expression he couldn't entirely read. I imagine he had other things to do. He still has other things to do. He's choosing not to do them in the afternoons. A silence. Mr. Whitmore, she said carefully, I am here to catalog a library. Whatever else you are inferring from that. I'm not inferring anything, Samuel said. I'm observing. There's a difference. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. And what I'm observing is that my brother, who has not genuinely talked to anyone in this valley in a very long time, comes into this room every afternoon and stays. He paused. I'm not telling you that to embarrass you. I'm telling you because I think you should know the weight of it. For him. Eleanor was still for a moment. Very still. I'm not staying to make things complicated for anyone, she said. I'm staying to finish the work. I know that. And when the work is done, I know that too. He stood. I just wanted you to know what it means. For him. He looked at her steadily. He's been very alone for a very long time, and I don't think he knows how to say that to anyone, so he just comes into the room, and works, and says things about survey documents. He picked up his hat from the table. I thought someone should tell you, since he won't. He left. Eleanor sat at the table alone for a long time after that. She did not go back to work for a full 10 minutes. She sat and looked at the east wall of books and thought about a man who drove fence posts when he needed to think, who sat still in the library because sitting still was the closest he could get to something he didn't have words for, who had refused 17 women not from pride but from a kind of bone-deep grief at being seen as a destination rather than a person. She thought about Samuel's voice when he said very alone for a very long time. She thought, I know something about that too. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. But something had settled in her differently. She was honest enough with herself to notice it, even if she was not ready yet to name it. It was a Wednesday, 12 days into her stay, when Harold Mercer came to the house. He did not send word ahead. He simply appeared at the front door at 10 in the morning, in a good coat despite the August heat, with the particular kind of social confidence that belongs to men who have never once in their lives been told they weren't welcome somewhere. Nathaniel was in his study. Mrs. Patton came to tell him Harold Mercer was in the front parlor. Nathaniel's expression did not change. Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes. He was there in 2. Mercer was standing near the fireplace, not sitting, which meant he wanted the visual advantage of height, with his hat in his hands and a smile on his face that had about as much warmth as a county tax notice. Nathaniel, he said, using the first name with the deliberate casualness of a man asserting rank he hadn't earned. Good of you to see me. Harold. Nathaniel did not extend his hand. Sit down. Mercer sat. The smile adjusted slightly. I'll be direct, Mercer said. I heard you've taken on a girl from Staunton. Library work, they're saying. We have a librarian cataloging the estate's collection, yes. Mercer ran his thumb along the brim of his hat. Thing is, Nathaniel, people are forming opinions. You know how it is. A young unmarried woman, in a house, under these circumstances. He spread his hands. I'm only telling you because I have some concern for your reputation, and for your grandmother's. Nathaniel looked at him. Just looked at him, Mercer continued. If there's something developing between you and this woman, that's your own affair. But in terms of how it appears to the county, Harold. Nathaniel's voice was quiet. The particular kind of quiet that people who knew him well had learned to treat as a warning. Let me make sure I understand you. You have come into my home, uninvited, to express concern about the reputation of a woman you have never met, who is employed here for a stated and legitimate purpose, and whose conduct, by any account, has been entirely beyond reproach. Mercer opened his mouth. I'm not finished, Nathaniel said. Mercer closed it. I'm aware of what you've been saying in town. I'm aware of the source and the motive, and I'm going to say this once, clearly, so that it can be carried back and repeated accurately. He stood. Miss Bennet is here because she was hired to do a job that needed doing. She is doing that job with a competence and dedication that puts most people in this county to shame. Any suggestion that her motives are other than professional is incorrect, and any person who continues to make that suggestion will find that I have a very long memory and a considerable amount of influence over how business is conducted in this valley. He walked to the parlor door and opened it. We're done, Harold. Mercer stood slowly. The smile was entirely gone. You're making a mistake. No, Nathaniel said. I'm correcting one. Mercer left. Nathaniel stood in the open doorway for a moment. He was aware that his hands were very steady, which sometimes happened when the anger was real enough to go all the way through and come out the other side as something cold and clear. Mrs. Patton appeared from the direction of the kitchen. She had, Nathaniel suspected, heard everything from the hallway. She looked at him with the expression she reserved for moments when she had formed an opinion she wasn't quite going to state aloud. He won't take that quietly, she said. No, Nathaniel agreed. He won't. He'll make more trouble. Probably. You knew that before you said it. Yes. She studied him. You said it anyway. Yes, Mrs. Patton, he said. I did. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once, the way she nodded when the world had done something she approved of, but wasn't going to make a large noise about. She went back to the kitchen. Nathaniel stood in the hallway. He thought about going to his study. He thought about going out to the fields. He walked to the library door instead, and knocked, and went in. Eleanor looked up. She read his face in 2 seconds flat, because she read things that way, quickly, without drama, taking them in and processing them before anyone else had finished forming the question. Mercer came, she said. Not a question. Yes. And you said something. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. I told you not to fight my battles. I know. Mr. Whitmore. He came to my house, Nathaniel said. That made it my battle too. She looked at him for a long beat of silence. He didn't look away. What did you say? She asked. He told her. Not everything. Not the part about his long memory and the valley's business. But enough. The essential part. When he finished, Eleanor was quiet for a moment. He'll retaliate, she said. I know. Against me, more than against you. Men like that always find the person they think will cost you more to defend. He looked at her. I know that too. And you still said it. Yes. She held his eyes. The afternoon light was long across the library floor, and in it she looked very settled and very real, and very much like a woman deciding something important. That was either very brave or very foolish, she said. Likely both, he said. In my experience, they're often the same thing. Something crossed her face then. Not the almost smile from before. Something quieter and more serious and harder to look away from. Thank you, she said. Mr. Whitmore. She said it simply, without performance. It landed the same way. You're welcome, he said, and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with propriety or the right social response. He went back to his chair at the far end of the table. He picked up his grandfather's papers. She picked up her pen. They worked. And in the quiet between them, the particular quality of quiet that had been accumulating day by day, afternoon by afternoon, survey document by survey document, something had changed, something small and real and irreversible. Neither of them said it. Neither of them needed to yet. But it was there. It sat in the room with them like a third presence, patient and certain, waiting for the moment when they would both be brave enough, or foolish enough, to look at it directly. The trouble came on a Thursday. It always came on ordinary days, Eleanor had noticed. Catastrophe rarely announced itself with dramatic weather or convenient timing. It simply walked in while you were doing something else entirely, wearing the face of something you hadn't thought to guard against. She was in the library when Mrs. Patton appeared in the doorway with the expression of a woman who had just heard something she wished she hadn't. "There's something you should know," Mrs. Patton said, "before someone else tells you in a way that's designed to hurt." Eleanor set down her pen. "Tell me." Harold Mercer held a dinner last night. 12 families from the county. The Greers, the Aldersons, the Pemberton family from up the ridge. Mrs. Patton folded her hands. "He told them you'd been seen going through Mr. Whitmore's private correspondence, that you'd been copying down financial records from the estate documents." She stopped. "He said you were gathering information about the property value, about what the estate is worth." Eleanor was very still. "He said it in front of witnesses," Mrs. Patton continued. 12 families, Miss Bennet. By morning it'll be 30. By Sunday it'll be everyone in the valley." Eleanor said nothing for a long moment. She looked at the table in front of her, at the neatly organized stacks, the cataloging notes in her own hand, the careful inventory she had been building for 3 weeks. She thought about all those mornings she had come before 6 o'clock, all the afternoons she had stayed until the light was too poor to work by, all the careful work she had done, not because anyone required it of her, but because it was the right way to do a thing. "Does Mr. Whitmore know?" she asked. "Not yet. He's out at the North Fields." Eleanor stood. She straightened the papers in front of her with precise, quiet movements. She capped her ink. She closed the book she had been working on. "Thank you, Mrs. Patton," she said, "for telling me." Mrs. Patton watched her. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to think," Eleanor said. "And then I'm going to decide." She found Samuel first. He was near the stable, and he saw her coming and knew from the way she walked that something had happened. Eleanor Bennet did not walk differently when she was upset. She had too much control for that. But she walked with a quality of intention when something had gone wrong that was different from her usual purposeful stride, more concentrated, like everything had narrowed to a single point. "You've heard," he said. "Mrs. Patton told me." She stopped in front of him. "Is it true that Mercer said I was copying financial records?" "That's what I heard an hour ago from Thomas Greer's boy, who apparently couldn't wait to deliver the news personally." Samuel's voice was flat. "It's a lie." "Yes," she said. "It is." She looked at him steadily. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "All right. Does it matter? To the people in this county? Does it matter that it's a lie, or does the accusation function the same way regardless?" Samuel was quiet for a moment. He respected her enough to think about it honestly rather than reassure her. "In the short term," he said, "the accusation functions the same way. People believe what confirms what they already suspected, and Mercer planted the suspicion weeks ago. So denial doesn't help. Denial rarely helps when the person making the accusation controls the dinner party." He looked at her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that I have 4 cataloging notebooks, every page dated, every entry initialed, documenting exactly what I was doing in that library every single day." She held his gaze. "I'm thinking that the estate documents I've been working with are not financial records. They are historical correspondence and survey documents and my grandmother's botanical journals, none of which have anything to do with the value of this property." Samuel was very still. "Can you prove that?" "Every page," she said. "Every day, in my own hand." She paused. But proof only matters if someone with standing presents it in a place where it has to be taken seriously. You mean Nathaniel? I mean the question of what happens next is not mine alone to answer. She met his eyes. Where is he? Nathaniel was back at the house by noon. He walked in already knowing. She could see it in his face the moment he came through the door. Someone had reached him at the North Fields. His foreman, maybe, or one of the hands who'd heard it in town. The specific source didn't matter. What mattered was the quality of his stillness when he stopped in the hallway and saw her waiting. Eleanor, he said. He used her name. He had not done that before. She noticed it and set it aside for later. You know, she said. I know. He came toward her. Are you all right? I'm not injured, she said. I'm angry. There is a difference. She looked at him directly. I want to show you something. She took him to the library. She laid out the cataloging notebooks on the table, all 4 of them, and opened them to the relevant sections. She showed him the dated entries, the itemized descriptions, the careful notation of every document she had handled, and every decision she had made about its classification. He stood over the table and read. He didn't skim. He actually read, with the focused attention of a man who understood documents and what they contained. When he looked up, his expression was clear and certain. These are not financial records. No, they are not. They're exactly what you said they were. Yes. He closed the notebook. He set it down with a kind of careful deliberateness. Mercer said this in front of 12 families. So I understand. He said it knowing it was false. He said it, Eleanor said, because it doesn't matter to him whether it's false. It only matters whether people believe it. And enough people want to believe something of this nature that the truth becomes almost irrelevant. She looked at him. I've seen this done before, to other women. It's a particular kind of weapon because it requires no evidence and leaves no physical mark. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. She watched him work through it, not quickly, but thoroughly, the way he did everything. What do you want to do? He said. The question surprised her. Again. The same way it had surprised her when he'd asked what she wanted him to do about Mercer's first round of talk. She had expected, from a man in his position, a statement. A decision already made. An action already planned, with her role being to approve it or endure it. She had not expected to be asked. I want to present the notebooks, she said, publicly, in a context where they have to be addressed rather than dismissed. Mercer controls most of the social contexts in this county. Then we need a context he doesn't control. She held his gaze. Does your grandmother still have influence with the Alderson family? He looked at her for a moment. You want to use the Alderson dinner, the end of summer gathering. Every important family in the county attends. They attended Mercer's dinner and heard his accusation. They should have the opportunity to hear a response. She kept her voice level. If I present the work directly, the notebooks, the inventory, the documented record, in front of the same witnesses, the accusation loses its foundation. It becomes a man's word against 4 notebooks full of evidence, and people who are fair-minded enough to look at evidence will see what it is. And the ones who aren't fair-minded have already decided, she said. Nothing I do will change them, and I can't spend my life trying, she paused. But the ones in the middle, the ones who heard Mercer and felt uncertain, those people deserve to see the truth. And frankly, so do I. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze and didn't flinch from it, because she had made her decision and she meant it, and she was not going to soften it to make it easier for him to refuse. All right, he said. You'll speak to your grandmother about the Alderson gathering? I'll speak to her today. He paused. Eleanor. There was the name again. There's something else. I sent a letter to Judge Prescott this morning, before I came home, about Mercer. She was still. What kind of letter? A factual account of what he said, to whom, when, and why it is false. His voice was even. Prescott is the county circuit judge. He has no jurisdiction over social gossip, but he has considerable authority over what constitutes defamatory speech in a professional context. And Mercer knows that. You did that before you talked to me. Yes. He held her eyes. I acted first and explained after. I know that's not what you prefer, but I was not willing to wait. She was quiet for a moment. She thought about being angry at him for it. She found, honestly, that she wasn't. She was something more complicated than angry. Something that lived in the same county as grateful, but had more dignity than that. Don't do it again, she said. Act first without telling me. I can't promise that, he said. If it comes to it. Then at least tell me faster. Yes, he said. That I can do. Margaret heard the whole of it from both of them, separately, within the same hour. She sat in her chair by the east window, hands folded in her lap, and listened to Nathaniel's account with the attention of a woman who had been listening to important things for 8 decades and knew the difference between the words being said and the thing underneath them. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The Alderson gathering is in 11 days, she said. Yes, Catherine Alderson owes me a favor of some standing. She said it without elaboration. She'll agree to what we need. I thought she might. Is Miss Bennet set on doing this herself, presenting the notebooks? It was her idea. Margaret looked at him. He looked back. They were having, as they often did, a conversation that contained 2 conversations simultaneously, and they were both fluent in it. She's not wrong, Margaret said. A woman defending herself is different from a man defending her. One is justice, the other is charity. I know. And you understand the difference. I do. She studied him for another moment. You called her Eleanor. He was quiet. You noticed that. I notice everything, she said, with the perfect serenity of a woman who absolutely did. Sit down, Nathaniel. He sat. Tell me where you are, she said. Not unkindly, just directly, the way she always spoke to him when the social niceties had become irrelevant. He thought about deflecting. He had deflected this conversation with himself for 11 days, had managed it reasonably well, had told himself that the afternoon hours in the library were about the work and the quiet and the useful arrangement of 2 people with compatible purposes. He had told himself a great many things. I don't know, he said, honestly. I know that she is not like anyone I have met before. I know that when I'm in that room with her, I'm not... He stopped. Tried again. I'm not performing anything. I'm not being the estate or the name or the man people expect when they drive past this house. I'm just... He stopped again. Yourself, Margaret said quietly. He looked at her. I haven't been that in a very long time, grandmother. She held his gaze. Her eyes were very bright. I know, my love, I know. The silence between them was full of things that didn't need to be said. What if she leaves when the library is finished, he said. Then you'll have let something real happen, Margaret said. And that will matter regardless of what comes after. She unfolded her hands and folded them again. But I don't think she'll leave when the library is finished. You don't know that. No, she agreed. But I know what I saw in her face when Mrs. Patton told me what she said after Samuel spoke to her in the library last week. She looked at him steadily. She sat still for 10 minutes, Nathaniel. This woman who is never still. She sat still and looked at the east wall and thought about something she wasn't ready to name yet. He was very quiet. She's not indifferent to you, Margaret said. She's careful. There is a difference. The 11 days before the Alderson gathering were the strangest of Nathaniel's recent memory. On the surface, nothing changed. Eleanor came to the library in the morning. He came in the afternoons. They worked, they talked, in the short, practical way they had developed, about the documents, about the cataloging system, occasionally about things that had nothing to do with either. She had an opinion about the territorial disputes in the Northwest that surprised him with its specificity. He had a knowledge of soil chemistry that surprised her with its depth. They disagreed about whether Jefferson's agricultural writings were better understood as practical science or philosophical exercise, and the disagreement lasted 3 afternoons and was never fully resolved. And neither of them wanted it resolved because the conversation was better than the conclusion would have been. But underneath all of it, under the work and the quiet and the practical talk, something was pulled tight, the way the air goes tight before a storm. The valley was watching. Mercer was watching. The Alderson gathering was coming. And in the space between the work and the watching, something was growing that neither of them had yet decided what to do with. On the 9th day, Mercer escalated. Samuel came in from town in the early afternoon, with his jaw set in the way that meant he had heard something he was working out how to say. "He's contacted the Staunton Lending Library," Samuel said. He said it to Nathaniel directly, which meant he had already decided Eleanor needed to hear it from him. Told them there are questions about a Miss Eleanor Bennett's professional conduct. Said there had been complaints. Nathaniel went very still. Complaints. Invented ones, but enough to make the library director nervous. Samuel looked at him. If they pull her professional reference, she loses her ability to take this kind of work, any kind of work, in any household that checks. He's trying to take her livelihood, Nathaniel said. He's trying to make her disappear, Samuel said flatly. The social talk wasn't enough. You answered it. So now he's going after something she can't answer in a parlor. Nathaniel stood up from his desk. "Where are you going?" Samuel asked. "To tell her." "Nathaniel?" "She told me to tell her faster. I'm telling her faster." He was already in the hallway. She was at the library table when he came in, and she read his face before he opened his mouth, the way she always did. "Sit down," she said. Before he could speak, he sat. "Tell me." He told her. All of it. Mercer. The Staunton Library. The professional reference. He watched her face as he spoke, and he watched her absorb it, the way she absorbed hard things. Quietly, going very still, all the processing happening inside where it didn't show. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. "He's thorough," she said finally. "Eleanor." "He's thorough," she said again, "and he's patient, and he understands how to hurt a woman of my position without leaving fingerprints." Her voice was steady. "He can't touch your land or your money, so he's going after the thing I have instead, which is my reputation as a professional." She looked at the table. "If my reference is questioned, I cannot work. If I cannot work, I have no income and no standing. And if I have no standing, everything he says about me becomes easier to believe." "We can fight it," Nathaniel said. "I can write to the Staunton Library director directly, as a reference." "You're writing to them on my behalf," she said carefully. "Will be interpreted as exactly the thing Mercer is suggesting. A wealthy man protecting a woman he has a personal interest in." She looked at him. "Do you see the trap?" He saw it. He sat with it. "Every move I make to defend you," he said slowly, "becomes evidence for his version of events." "Yes, and every move you make to defend yourself is undermined by the suggestion that you're protecting your access to this house." "Yes." Her voice was level, but he could hear underneath it. Not fear exactly. Something harder than fear. The particular exhaustion of a woman who has fought battles like this before and knows exactly how much it costs. He's built it very carefully. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. She let him be quiet. "What does he want?" he said finally. "In the end, what is the outcome he's working toward?" "He wants me gone," she said. "He wants me discredited and removed, and then he wants the story to settle the way stories do, into a version where a foolish woman overreached herself and a sensible family decided they didn't need the trouble." She met his eyes. "And then he'd like to reintroduce his daughter, I imagine, on his terms, with the lesson learned." The silence was long and pointed. "He has misjudged several things," Nathaniel said. "He has," Eleanor agreed. "But misjudging and losing are not the same thing. The Alderson gathering is in 2 days." "Yes." "Are you still prepared to do what we discussed?" She looked at him steadily. "More than I was before." He nodded. He started to stand. "Nathaniel." She used his name, the first time. He went very still without making it obvious. She seemed to notice that she'd done it. She didn't retract it. "What happens after? If this works? If I present the notebooks and Mercer loses the argument, what happens to you?" "He won't stop being angry." "I know that." He has influence in this county. He can make business difficult for you. Trade arrangements, land assessments. He has a hand in more things than people realize. I know all of that. And you're—" She stopped. "You're still prepared to do this." He looked at her for a moment. "Eleanor," he said, "someone once told me that a woman who cannot manage other people's bad opinions is a woman who cannot manage anything." He held her gaze. "That same logic applies." She looked at him. Something in her face did the thing it had been doing lately, shifting, carefully, toward something that was not quite an expression yet, but was becoming one. "Thank you," she said, in the same simple, real way she had said it before. "Stop thanking me," he said. "It implies I'm doing you a favor. I'm not." He looked at her directly. "I'm just doing what's right." The Alderson gathering was held on a Saturday evening. The house was full. Every family Mercer had spoken to was there, which Margaret had ensured, because Margaret had a gift for making invitations feel inevitable. The Greers, the Pembertons, the Aldersons themselves, and Harold Mercer, who had been invited with a warmth that gave him no reasonable excuse to refuse, and every reason to suspect something, but not enough certainty to decline. He arrived and saw Eleanor Bennet standing calmly near the fireplace, and his expression shifted for exactly 1 second before he controlled it again. Eleanor saw the shift. She filed it away. The evening proceeded through supper and conversation with the surface pleasantness that Virginia society maintained even when everyone in the room knew a reckoning was coming. Margaret Whitmore held court at the far end of the table with the authority of a woman who had been the most important person in any room she entered for 60 years, and she was magnificent. It was after supper, when the families had gathered in the main parlor, that Catherine Alderson, white-haired, sharp-eyed, with the social authority of a woman who had hosted 40 years of county gatherings and knew exactly how they worked, rose and said, pleasantly but unmistakably, "I understand there has been some talk recently about Miss Eleanor Bennet's work at the Whitmore estate. I thought, since so many of us have heard some version of the story, that we might hear the account directly. Miss Bennet." The room went quiet. Eleanor stood. She was not wearing anything she hadn't worn before. She had not dressed for performance. She had brought the 4 cataloging notebooks, and she set them on the table in front of her, and she opened the first one, and she began to speak. She was not loud, she was not dramatic, she was precise and clear and completely without apology. She walked through the cataloging work, what it was, what it required, what documents she had handled and why, with dates and notations. She showed the entries that corresponded to the estate documents Mercer had described as financial records. She named what those documents actually were. She read excerpts. She answered, without being asked, every specific accusation she had heard attributed to Mercer. The room listened. She could feel it. The shift in attention. The particular quality of silence when a group of people has been told one story and is now hearing another and beginning to understand they were manipulated. When she finished, she closed the last notebook. She looked up. "I have worked as a professional librarian and cataloger for 4 years," she said. "I have references from 3 households in the Shenandoah Valley and 1 in Richmond. I came to the Whitmore estate to do a specific job, and I have done it. Any person in this room who would like to examine these notebooks is welcome to do so." The silence held for a moment. Then Thomas Greer, of all people, Thomas Greer, who could not hold information inside himself for 3 consecutive minutes, said, in a voice that the whole room could hear, "Well, Harold, that sure doesn't look like copying financial records to me." A few people laughed, not cruelly, the uncomfortable, releasing kind. Mercer stood. His face was controlled, but barely. "A document can be organized to present whatever story the organizer chooses to. Harold." Nathaniel's voice came from across the room. He was standing near the east wall, where he had been for the past hour. He had not moved from it. He had simply been there, present, in the way that mattered. 4 notebooks, every day, dated and initialed. The documents she handled are listed by name. Historical correspondence, survey records, botanical journals. Not a single financial document. Not one. The room was very quiet. "You said she was copying financial records," Nathaniel continued. The notebooks prove she was not. You said she was gathering information about the estate's value. The notebooks prove she was not. He paused. I've known you a long time, Harold. I'm asking you, in front of these people who respect you, to reconsider the story you've been telling and whether you can stand behind it tonight. Mercer stood for a long moment. He looked at Nathaniel. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at the room full of people holding their breath. He said, I may have been given incomplete information. It was not an apology. It was not even close to one. But it was a retreat, and everyone in the room heard it for what it was. Catherine Alderson said smoothly, How about some dessert? And the moment broke, and people began to move, and the gathering resumed its social surface with the particular determination that polite Virginia society applied to the aftermath of difficult truths. But in the breaking, something had happened. Eleanor had stood in front of a county's worth of witnesses and made her case and won it on the merits of her own work. Not on Nathaniel's word, not on Margaret's influence, though both had mattered. On her own work. She sat back down. She felt the tension leave her shoulders in a long, slow release. Samuel appeared beside her. He sat down and poured her a glass of water without asking whether she wanted one. That was something. It was necessary, she said. It was also something. He glanced across the room to where Nathaniel was still standing, speaking now with Judge Prescott in a low voice. He hasn't moved from that wall all evening. Eleanor followed his gaze. Nathaniel felt it, felt her looking, and turned his head. Their eyes met across the room. He nodded once. Small, private. The specific nod of a man communicating something he did not have the words for yet, but meant completely. She looked back at Samuel. He stood there so that if anything went wrong, he was already in position. Yes, Samuel said. He thought of that 2 days ago. He told me where he was going to stand. She was quiet. He planned his position in the room, Samuel said, based on where he could intervene most quickly if you needed it, and then he made sure he didn't have to. He looked at her carefully. Eleanor, I don't think my brother has planned anything with that much care since he was managing the estate takeover after Father died. She looked across the room again. Nathaniel had turned back to Judge Prescott. His profile was steady and familiar in a way that she had not, until that moment, fully accounted for. Familiar. That was the word. In 11 days he had become familiar. The way things become familiar that you have been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. She picked up the glass of water Samuel had poured. She drank it. She set it down. She did not look across the room again that evening, because she had already decided something, and she needed to decide it privately before it showed on her face. But Mercer caught her arm near the door as the gathering ended. He was smiling. Still, even now. You're good, he said, quietly enough that no one else could hear. I'll give you that, tonight. But this isn't finished, Miss Bennet. A woman in your position, with your means, you can win a parlor argument. You can't win a sustained campaign. She looked at his hand on her arm. She looked at his face. Mr. Mercer, she said, quietly. I have not begun to campaign. She walked out. Nathaniel was at the bottom of the steps, waiting with the carriage. He'd known she'd need the exit, had positioned himself there the way he'd positioned himself at the wall, with forethought and without making a show of it. He offered his hand to help her down the steps. She took it. He didn't let go immediately, and she didn't move away immediately. They stood like that for a moment in the summer night, with the sound of the gathering still warm behind them. He threatened you, Nathaniel said. He'd seen Mercer's hand on her arm. He tried to, she said. What did you say? I told him I hadn't started yet. He was quiet for a moment. Then something happened on his face that was not quite a smile, but was the thing underneath a smile, the real thing that the smile is made of. Good, he said. She looked at him in the night air, familiar and steady, with the warm light from the Alderson house falling across his face and the summer dark pressing in around them both. And Eleanor Bennet, who had built her whole adult life on the reliable foundation of her own competence and self-sufficiency, felt something shift that she had been holding in place for 11 days with considerable effort. It did not break. It did not collapse. It simply moved. Toward him. 1 inch. Quiet. Real. She stepped up into the carriage. He stepped back. They rode home in the dark, and neither of them said anything, and neither of them needed to. The ride home from the Alderson gathering took 40 minutes. Neither of them spoke for the first 20. Not from discomfort. From the particular kind of silence that settles after something significant has happened, and both people involved are still processing the shape of it, still tracing the edges, still deciding what it means. Samuel rode up front with the driver and had the good sense not to turn around. Margaret sat across from them in the carriage, with her hands folded and her eyes partially closed, in the way she adopted when she wanted people to believe she was resting, and was not, in fact, listening to every breath in the vehicle. It was Eleanor who broke it. "Your grandmother arranged the whole thing," she said. Not an accusation, just a fact, placed into the air. "Catherine Alderson owed her a favor," Nathaniel said. That was not an answer. A pause. No, it wasn't. "She arranged the setting, the witness list, the timing." Eleanor looked at him in the dark of the carriage. "She knew that I'd need exactly those families in that room. She made sure every person who had heard Mercer's version was present to hear mine." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "She did that," Eleanor said, "before either of us asked her to." From the opposite seat, Margaret did not open her eyes. But the quality of her stillness changed by a degree that Nathaniel, who had known her for 34 years, recognized as the stillness of a woman exercising very deliberate self-restraint. "Grandmother," he said. Said Margaret. "Thank you." A pause. "I'm sure I don't know what you're referring to, dear." Eleanor made a small sound. It was not quite a laugh, but it was close. And in the dark of the carriage, Nathaniel heard it, and something inside him loosened that had been held tight for the better part of a month. They reached the house. Samuel helped Margaret down. Nathaniel stepped out and turned and offered his hand to Eleanor, the same as he had at the Alderson steps, and she took it, the same as she had then. But this time, when she reached the ground and her hand was still in his, she didn't step away. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. The summer night was warm, and the house was lit behind them, and everything that had been accumulating for 18 days was present in the 5 inches of space between them. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes." "I need to tell you something." "All right. I don't know what I'm doing," she said. "With this. With whatever this is." She said it with the same directness she brought to everything else. No performance, no careful softening. "I'm good at my work. I understand books and documents and cataloging systems. I am not good at—" She stopped. "Neither am I," he said. She looked at him. "I have been," he said carefully, "entirely without practice." He paused. Deliberately. For a long time. "I know. That doesn't—" He stopped. Tried again. "I'm not going to be easy at it." "I didn't ask for easy," she said. "I've managed difficult things before." "I'm aware," he said. "I've watched you do it." She held his eyes. "I'm not leaving when the library is finished." The words landed quietly, with all their weight. He said, "Eleanor, I'm not finished," she said. "I'm not leaving when the library is finished because I don't want to leave. That is a separate thing from what you might offer me, or what your grandmother might arrange, or what the county might think about any of it. I want to be clear about the order of things. That comes first." He was very still. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. And that was all. No declaration, no grand gesture, no performance of the thing. They were both too honest and too careful for. Just two people standing in the summer night, having said true things to each other and meaning them. Samuel appeared in the doorway of the house and then disappeared immediately back inside with the speed of a man who had seen something he wanted very much not to interrupt. The morning after was ordinary in all the ways that matter most. Eleanor was in the library at 6:30. Mrs. Patton brought her coffee. The south shutters were open. The last section of the cataloging work was laid out on the table, the final inventory nearly complete. Nathaniel came down at 7, found the kitchen empty, and went to the library. He knocked. "Come in," she said. He came in. She was working. He sat at his end of the table. He picked up the last of his grandfather's papers. They worked. But something had changed in the quality of the silence. It had been comfortable before, the silence of two people with compatible purposes. Now it was comfortable in a different way. The way of two people who have said the true things and are no longer managing around them. Around 9 o'clock, without looking up from what she was doing, Eleanor said, "Tell me something I don't know about you." He looked up. She was still writing. "Something true," she added. "Not something you'd tell someone at supper." He thought about it. He thought about what he would tell someone at supper. The estate, the acreage, the timber operation, the weather, the fence line problems, the price of goods in the valley. All of it real, none of it true. "I was afraid of this house when I was a child," he said. She looked up then. "Not the way children are afraid of dark rooms," he said. "I was afraid of what it meant, what it required." He looked at the far wall of books. "My father used to say that the house would always demand more than you thought you had. And then you'd find it, because you had to. And then it would demand more." He was quiet for a moment. "I spent a long time thinking that was wisdom. Then I spent a long time wondering if it was just what a man says when he doesn't know how to stop." Eleanor was still, listening. "He wasn't a cruel man," Nathaniel said. "He was absent. In the way that men are absent when the work is the answer to everything. When you go to the work the way other people go to drink, because it fills the space and asks nothing back." He paused. "I learned it from him, the absence. I learned it very well." She looked at him for a moment. "And the 17 women," she said quietly. "Yes." He met her eyes. "I kept looking for someone who would see through it. The house, the name, the estate. Who would look at me the way you looked at me when I came in from the fields that first day." He stopped. "Like I was just a man who'd tracked mud in." She was quiet. Then, "You noticed that?" "I notice everything," he said, slowly, "but everything." She set down her pen. She looked at him with that direct, assessing gaze that he had come to understand was not judgment, but genuine attention, the look she gave things worth looking at carefully. "Nathaniel," she said, "I want to tell you something true in return." "All right. I have spent 4 years building a life that requires nothing from anyone, deliberately." She said it clearly. "My father was a good man and a bad financial manager, and when he died, there was very little left, and I understood that I was going to have to make my own way, or not make it at all. So I made it." She paused. "And I became good at it. The independence, the self-sufficiency. Good enough that I stopped being able to tell the difference between choosing it and hiding in it." He watched her. "When Samuel told me, in this room, that you came here every afternoon and sat still because it was the closest you could get to something you didn't have words for." She stopped. "I sat still for 10 minutes after he left, which is not something I do." "I know," he said. "Mrs. Patton told me." She blinked. "Mrs. Patton told you?" "She tells me everything that matters," he said. "She's been doing it for 19 years. Eleanor absorbed this. Then, slowly, she laughed. A real one, surprised out of her, the kind that wasn't performed. And Nathaniel Whitmore, who had not heard genuine laughter in this library in years, felt it like water on dry ground. Mercer's retaliation came on a Tuesday. Not the sustained campaign he had threatened. Something faster and crueler. The move of a man who had been publicly embarrassed and needed to reassert control before the story settled against him. He filed a formal complaint with the county land office, not about Eleanor, about Nathaniel. He alleged that the Whitmore Estate's North Boundary Survey, the one Nathaniel had been reviewing for months, the one that ran adjacent to Mercer's own land, had been falsified, that the survey markers had been moved, that the Whitmore estate was claiming acreage that rightfully belonged to the Mercer family. It was, as Samuel said flatly when he brought the news, a lie constructed on a foundation of paperwork that would take months to disprove. Nathaniel sat at his desk and read the filing twice. Then he said, "Where are the original survey documents?" Samuel blinked. What? From the library cataloging. The survey documents Eleanor sorted 3 weeks ago. He stood. Where are they? Understanding crossed Samuel's face. She cataloged them, by date and content. Yes, Nathaniel was already moving toward the door. Including the 1789 survey, they found Eleanor in the library, already standing. She had heard Samuel come in, had heard the quality of the voices through the wall, and had pulled the property survey section of the catalog before either of them reached the door. The 1789 Whitmore Boundary Survey, she said, setting it on the table. And the 1803 resurvey confirming the same markers, both cataloged, dated, and cross-referenced. She looked at Nathaniel. I assume this is about the north boundary. How did you? I read the documents when I cataloged them, she said. The 1789 survey notes that the Mercer family disputed the north marker at that time and lost the dispute. There's a county record notation in the margin. She opened the cataloging entry and pointed. Your grandfather wrote a letter about it to the county registrar. It's in the correspondence section, page 47. Nathaniel stared at her. It was all here, she said calmly. It was in this library. It's been in this library for 30 years. She held his gaze. Mercer filed that complaint assuming you couldn't produce the evidence quickly enough to counter it. He was counting on the documents being lost or disorganized. A pause. They're not. Samuel made a sound that was not quite a word. Nathaniel looked at the cataloging entry. He looked at Eleanor. He thought about 30 years of his family's history, sitting unread and unsorted in a room he had walked past every day of his adult life, and a woman who had come in before 6 in the morning and given it order, and the way that order had just, in this exact moment, saved him months of legal dispute, and potentially a significant portion of his estate. Eleanor, he said. Yes. I need to get this to Judge Prescott today. I know. She was already pulling the relevant pages. The 1789 survey, the 1803 resurvey, the correspondence with the county registrar, and the original disputed marker notation. I'll make copies of the catalog entries so the originals don't have to leave. She looked up. Give me an hour. He stood and watched her work for a moment. She was already at the table, pulling the originals carefully from the preservation shelf, her movements quick and precise and completely without drama. Samuel appeared at his elbow. She cataloged his defeat before he even made the move, Samuel said, quietly enough that only Nathaniel heard it. She cataloged the library, Nathaniel said. The defeat is incidental. Is it? Nathaniel watched Eleanor Bennett work. Her hands were steady. Her attention was complete. She had been in this library for 3 weeks, and she had brought it order, and in bringing it order had preserved something that mattered. Not because she'd known it would matter, but because that was simply how she did things. With care, with completeness, without any eye toward what it might gain her. No, he said quietly. It's not incidental at all. The documents reached Judge Prescott by 3 in the afternoon. Prescott read them, read the catalog notation, read the 1789 letter in Nathaniel's grandfather's hand describing the original Mercer dispute, and then he sat back in his chair and looked at Nathaniel across his desk and said, "This complaint is going to be withdrawn by end of week." "I know," Nathaniel said. "Mercer will know you have this documentation now. He'll know the library is cataloged." "Yes. He won't try this particular angle again." Prescott looked at him steadily. "You understand what I'm telling you. He'll try a different one." "I understand." "The woman who cataloged the library," Prescott said. "Miss Bennett." "Yes. She produced all of this in an hour." "She cataloged it 3 weeks ago," Nathaniel said. "She simply retrieved it today." Prescott was quiet for a moment. He had known Nathaniel Whitmore for 12 years. He had the look of a man putting pieces together and arriving somewhere he hadn't expected. "She came to do a job," he said. "Yes." "And she did it?" "Yes, thoroughly." Another pause. "Nathaniel," Prescott said carefully, "I've known you to be a measured man. I've never known you to be a foolish one. I'm going to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Is this personal? Nathaniel met his gaze. It is. Prescott absorbed this. Does she know that? She does. And? And she's not leaving when the library is finished. Prescott looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, with the gravity of a man who understood weight and was satisfied that the person carrying it knew what it was. Then I'd advise you not to let Mercer get a second round, he said. Move deliberately, and soon. I intend to, Nathaniel said. He rode a home with the August sun going long and the fields running golden on both sides of the road, and he thought about what soon meant and what deliberately meant and what it looked like when a man who had built his whole adult life around careful management of risk decided, finally, that some things were worth more than caution. He found her in the garden, not the library, the kitchen garden, where she had no business being, where she had apparently wandered at the end of the afternoon and been recruited by the kitchen girl to identify an herb that had grown up unrecognized among the rosemary. She was kneeling in the dirt, which she did not seem to mind at all, with the kitchen girl crouched next to her, and she was explaining, with that clear, patient voice she used when explaining things she knew well, that what they had was in fact wild thyme, which was edible and excellent, and had probably seeded itself from the domestic variety 3 summers ago. She looked up when she heard him come through the gate. It's wild thyme, she told him. I heard. She stood. The kitchen girl retreated to the house. Eleanor brushed her hands on her skirt and looked at him with the reading look, the 2-second assessment. Prescott, she said. Prescott. He stopped in front of her. Mercer's complaint will be withdrawn by end of week. She nodded. She had expected nothing less. And after that? He'll try something else. Prescott agrees. Yes. She looked at him steadily. We should discuss what that means. For you. For the estate. He's not going to stop being angry, and angry men with money and influence are... Eleanor. He said it quietly. Stop. She stopped. I need to say something, he said. And I need to say it before I think about it so carefully that I find a reason not to. She was very still. I have been, he said, thinking about the order of things. You told me, in the carriage last week, that what you felt came first, before anything offered or arranged or expected. He looked at her. I want you to know that I understand what you meant by that, and I want to be as honest with you as you were with me. She waited. I do not want to offer you a situation, he said. I do not want to offer you security, or a household, or a position in this county. Those things exist. They're real. But they are not. He stopped. They are not why I'm standing in the kitchen garden. Why are you standing in the kitchen garden? She asked. Because, he said, you are in it. She looked at him. He looked at her. Because, he continued, you are the first person in my memory who has sat in this house and looked at what is actually in it, not what it's worth, not what it costs, not what it represents, but what is actually here. The books, the documents, the wild thyme in the wrong part of the garden. He paused. Me. Something moved across her face. That shift that had been happening, that quiet, careful movement toward something, completed itself. Nathaniel, she said. I know it's soon, he said. It's not soon, she said. We've been sitting in the same room for 3 weeks. We've had more honest conversation in 3 weeks than most people have in 3 years. She held his gaze. I know who you are. I decided who you were before I decided how I felt about it, and that is the right order. Yes, he said. It is. So say what you came to say. He took a breath. I would like... He stopped, started differently. I am asking you, Eleanor, not the county, not my grandmother, not the library, and not the estate, and not the Whitmore name. He looked at her directly. I am asking you, whether you would stay, not as the cataloger, as something that doesn't have a name yet, but that I mean completely. She held his gaze for a long moment. That is, she said, the least romantic proposal of any kind I have ever heard. I know, he said. I told you I wasn't going to be easy at it. You did say that. I meant it. Yes, she said. I know you meant it. She looked at him. That is, in fact, why the answer is yes. He stood very still. Yes, she said again, clearly, without performance. I took one step toward her. She did not step back. He reached out and took her hand in both of his. The hands that drove fence posts and managed survey documents and hadn't known what to do with themselves for a very long time. And he held it with the care he gave things that were worth holding carefully. Eleanor, he said. Yes, Nathaniel. I am going to be better at this, he said. In time. I know you will, she said. I'll be patient. I'm good at sitting still with difficult things. I am aware, he said, that I am the difficult thing in this particular sentence. She laughed again. That real, surprised laugh. He felt it the same way he'd felt it in the library, like something opening. They stood in the kitchen garden in the August afternoon, not performing anything, not managing anything, just being two people who had found each other in the honest way, through work and truth and the accumulation of ordinary days, and had decided, carefully and clearly, that this was worth more than safety. Margaret heard the news from Samuel, who had been watching from the upper window, and who came downstairs with an expression of barely contained satisfaction. She said yes, Samuel said. Margaret set down her needlework. Of course she did. He asked her in the kitchen garden. A pause. The wild time. Samuel stopped. How did you know about the wild time? I asked the kitchen girl to take Miss Bennet to look at it this afternoon, Margaret said serenely. Samuel stared at her. It needed identifying, she said. Grandmother. It genuinely did need identifying, Samuel. It had been unclear all summer. He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about asking how much of the past 3 weeks had been arranged and how much had simply unfolded. He decided, wisely, that there were some questions better left unasked. You're extraordinary, he said. I'm 81, she said. I've learned how to be patient. She picked up her needlework again. Tell Nathaniel I'd like to speak with him before supper. To congratulate him? To tell him, she said, that if he doesn't handle this properly, and with full respect for what that woman has built and who she is, I will rescind the East Wing inheritance. Samuel looked at her. She looked at her needlework. I'll tell him, he said. Nathaniel came to his grandmother's sitting room at 5:30. She looked at him when he came in, and she saw, in his face, the thing she had been waiting for, had been hoping for, had been carefully tending toward, for longer than she would have told him. He looked like himself. Not the estate, not the name, not the careful, armored version of himself that he had worn like a second skin since he was 26 years old. He looked like Nathaniel, the boy she had known before the war, and the inheritance, and the 17 refusals, and the long years of building fences around himself. He sat in the chair across from her. She said yes, he told her. I know. She set down her needlework. Nathaniel, look at me. He looked at her. I arranged the Alderson gathering, she said. I arranged for the library position. I wrote to Eleanor's former employer in Staunton before I wrote to Eleanor, to understand who she was and whether the work was genuine. She held his gaze steadily. I want you to know that. Before you tell me I interfered. He was quiet for a moment. You wrote to her employer. I did. And what did you learn? That she was the finest cataloger they had worked with. That she had refused 3 offers of more comfortable domestic positions because she preferred work she could be proud of. That she was honest to the point of inconvenience and competent beyond any reasonable expectation. Margaret held his eyes. And that she had never once, in 4 years, given anyone cause to question her character. And then you arranged the rest. I arranged the meeting. The library did need cataloging. That was real. She paused. Everything else was yours and hers. I did not arrange that. He looked at her for a long moment. You could have told me, he said, who she was, before. Yes, she said. I could have. And you would have arrived at that first meeting already decided, and she would have seen it, and it would have been exactly like every other introduction. She held his gaze. She needed to find you the way she found you, walking in with your mud and your survey documents, being someone she hadn't been prepared to meet. He sat with that. He thought about Eleanor arriving with the worn leather bag and the blue dress, and looking at the house with the professional, assessing gaze, and saying, "How do you do?" in the same tone she'd used for the Jefferson Almanac. He thought about what would have happened if he'd known, before that moment, that his grandmother had vetted her, if he'd been prepared, if he'd been managing it. "You're right," he said. "I usually am," she said, without any particular pride, just accuracy. He looked at her, really looked at her, the way he didn't often enough, the way he would regret not doing more when she was gone. And he said, "Thank you, grandmother, for not giving up." Her face did something he rarely saw it do, something that lived in the area of tears without quite being them. "You are," she said quietly, "the thing I am most proud of in this world, Nathaniel. Not the estate, not the name. You." She paused. "I simply refuse to watch you disappear into it." He reached across and took her hand. She held his. They sat like that for a moment, the way people sit when words have done all they can do. Then she said, with perfect timing, "The East Wing inheritance stands, by the way, provided you do this properly." "Samuel told you I heard the threat." "I assumed Samuel would tell you." "You assumed correctly." She patted his hand and let it go. "Good. Now go and be with that woman before she comes to her senses." He stood. He smiled. A real one. The one that happened when nothing was being managed. "I'll be at a supper," he said. "Bring her to supper," Margaret said. "Not as the cataloger, as something that doesn't have a name yet," Nathaniel said, "but that we mean completely." Margaret looked at him for a moment. "That will do," she said. "For now." He found Eleanor in the library. Of course he found her in the library. She had an hour left of daylight and 4 pages remaining in the final cataloging notebook. And Eleanor Bennett was not the kind of woman who left 4 pages unfinished because something significant had happened in the kitchen garden. He came to the doorway and she looked up. "Come to watch?" she said. "Yes," he said. He sat at his end of the table. He picked up nothing. He just sat and watched her work. She raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to work?" "No. I'm going to sit here and be grateful that you know where everything is." She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to the last 4 pages. He watched her work. I thought about Harold Mercer, who had wanted to reduce her to a footnote in someone else's story and had instead created the conditions under which she had proven, in front of the entire county, exactly who she was. He thought about that and felt something that was close to gratitude even for Mercer, because without the battle, certain things would have taken much longer to name. I thought about his grandfather's library, sitting unread for 30 years, and what it had taken to bring someone in to give it the attention it deserved, and how that someone had turned out to be the person who gave him the same attention. He thought about his father saying the house would always demand more than you thought you had, and then you'd find it, because you had to. He thought, the old man was right. He just had the wrong subject. Eleanor closed the last notebook. She capped her ink. She straightened the completed catalog, all 4 notebooks, every page dated and initialed, and set it at the edge of the table. "Done," she said. He looked at her. "How does it feel?" "Like finishing something properly always feels," she said. "Good. And a little strange because the work is what you've been doing, and then it's not, and you have to decide what comes next." She looked at the notebooks, then at him. "Fortunately," she said, "I've already decided what comes next." "Have you?" "Yes." She held his gaze. "I'm going to help you build a proper filing system for the estate records. They're a disaster. The survey documents alone are—" He started laughing, the real kind, full and surprised, and nothing at all like performance. She watched him laugh with a look that was not quite a smile, but was everything a smile is made of. "That is not what you expected me to say," she said. "No," he said. It wasn't. Did you want a different answer? No, he said. That answer is completely perfect. She looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up her pen, opened a fresh page in a new notebook, wrote the date at the top, August 1817, and said, "Then let's begin." And just like that, in the library that had waited 30 years for someone to take it seriously, with the light going amber through the south shutters and the summer pressing warm against the windows, Nathaniel Whitmore understood that this was what it felt like when something real started. Not with a grand gesture. Not with a declaration the county could talk about. Just two people, a table, a fresh page, and the willingness to begin. The estate records were, as Eleanor had correctly diagnosed, a disaster. Not the catalogued library materials. Those were now in perfect order. 4 notebooks of documented history that had already saved the Whitmore estate from one fraudulent land complaint. The estate's active business records were the problem. 12 years of Nathaniel's meticulous but unsystematized management, stacked in his study in a filing arrangement that made complete sense to him and no sense whatsoever to anyone else. Eleanor understood this within 20 minutes of being allowed into his study. "This," she said, standing in front of the main shelving with her arms crossed, "is organized by memory. Yours." "It works," he said from behind his desk. "It works as long as you're alive and present and in possession of your faculties," she said. "The moment any of those conditions changes, no one will be able to find anything." She turned to look at him. "Your grandfather's survey records sat unread for 30 years because he organized them the same way. By memory. His." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "That is a fair point," he said. "I know it is." She pulled a stack of folders from the third shelf. "I'm going to need another notebook." He opened his desk drawer and produced one. She looked at it, looked at him. "You keep blank notebooks in your desk." "I noticed you went through them quickly." She stood holding the notebook for a moment, and something moved through her expression that she didn't manage in time. Something warm and unguarded and completely real. "Thank you," she said. "Stop thanking me," he said. "We discussed this." "You're right." She opened the notebook. "It's useful and appropriate and not a favor. I know. Exactly." She sat down across from him and began. He went back to his work. They were in the same room, doing different things, in the particular comfortable parallel that had become, over the course of August, the most natural arrangement either of them had known. It lasted exactly 11 minutes before Samuel knocked on the study door and came in with his jaw set in the way that meant news. "Chatter." "Mercer's filed again," Samuel said. Nathaniel set down his pen. Eleanor looked up. "Not a land complaint this time," Samuel said. "A character complaint. Formal, to the county board. He's alleging that Nathaniel demonstrated conduct unbecoming a man of property and standing by publicly humiliating a county neighbor at a private social gathering." Samuel's voice was flat. "He's referring to the Alderson evening. He's saying Nathaniel orchestrated a public attack on his reputation." The study was very quiet. "He's inverting it," Eleanor said. Not loud, just clear. "Yes," Samuel said. "He's saying he was the victim of a coordinated social attack. That Nathaniel used his grandmother's influence to stage an ambush." "At a gathering that Mercer was invited to and chose to attend," Nathaniel said. "Yes." "Where Eleanor presented documented evidence of her own work." "Yes." "And he's characterizing that as an attack on him." "Hi is." Samuel looked at his brother steadily. "The complaint has some traction, Nathaniel. 2 families on the county board are Mercer affiliates. If they push this through, it could affect your standing with the land office, the merchant licensing. It could complicate a lot of things." Nathaniel sat back in his chair. He looked at the wall for a moment, in the way he looked at things he was thinking through completely before he spoke about them. Eleanor was watching him. "He's not wrong that it was coordinated," Nathaniel said finally. "Nathaniel," Samuel started. "He's wrong about everything else," Nathaniel said. "But the gathering was coordinated. Grandmother arranged the witness list deliberately. That part is true." He looked at Eleanor. "If this goes to the board, they're going to ask that question, whether the gathering was arranged. The answer is yes." The gathering was arranged to present evidence, Eleanor said. That is different from arranging an attack. To us it is. To a board with 2 Mercer affiliates on it, the distinction may be presented as flexible. She held his gaze. What do you want to do? He looked at her for a long moment. What I want to do and what is correct are the same thing, he said. I want to tell the truth, all of it, including the parts that are complicated. He turned to Samuel. Who chairs the county board currently? Alderson, Samuel said. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Of course it's Alderson. Catherine Alderson, Samuel confirmed, who hosted the gathering, who witnessed the whole of it. Then we request a hearing, Nathaniel said, a full one, and we present exactly what happened and why, without managing the story. He looked at Eleanor. You'll need to speak again. I know, she said. It will be harder this time. A formal board hearing is different from a social gathering. I know that too. She met his eyes. Nathaniel, have I given you any reason to think I'm not prepared for difficult? He looked at her. Something settled in his expression. No, he said. You haven't. Then stop managing my expectations and let me be part of this. Samuel made a small sound from the doorway that could have been a cough. Right, Nathaniel said. Yes. He turned to Samuel. Send word to Judge Prescott and request an appointment today. Tell him it's urgent. Samuel left. Eleanor opened her notebook to a fresh page. Tell me everything about the county board, every member, their relationships, their business interests, their history with the Mercer family. She looked at him. If we're walking into a hearing, I want to know the room before we're in it. He looked at her sitting across from him, with her notebook and her pen and her complete, unfrightened attention. And he thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that Harold Mercer had made a catastrophic error in choosing Eleanor Bennett as a target. He began to talk. She began to write. Prescott met them that afternoon. He read the complaint. He set it down. He looked at Nathaniel and then at Eleanor, with the expression of a man whose patience for Harold Mercer had reached a limit he was going to manage professionally and with great difficulty. He's attempting, Prescott said carefully, to reframe the outcome of the Alderson gathering as a harm done to him. Yes, Nathaniel said, because he cannot argue the substance. The notebooks were clear and witnessed. He is arguing the process. Yes. Prescott was quiet for a moment. I've been on the circuit for 16 years. I have seen this particular strategy twice before. He folded his hands on the desk. Both times, it worked in the short term and failed comprehensively in the long term, because it required the complainant to sustain a version of events that didn't match what multiple witnesses had seen with their own eyes. He looked at Nathaniel. You have witnesses. The entire Alderson gathering, Nathaniel said, including Catherine Alderson herself. Yes. Then my advice is this. Request the hearing. Present the truth, fully and without management. And then let the board decide. He paused. The 2 Mercer affiliates will vote against you regardless of evidence. The other 3 will vote for you if the evidence is clear and the presentation is honest. He looked at Eleanor directly. Miss Bennett, the weight of this will fall on your account, not Mr. Whitmore's. I understand that, she said. A formal board hearing is a different context than a social gathering. Mercer's representative will attempt to suggest that your presence in this household indicates a personal relationship that compromises your professional credibility. She held his gaze. They would not be entirely wrong that there is a personal relationship, she said, with a steadiness that made Prescott blink. They would be entirely wrong that it compromises my professional credibility. Those are separate questions, and I intend to keep them separate in any testimony I give. Prescott looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Nathaniel. All right, he said. Request the hearing. The hearing was set for the following Wednesday. 6 days. The house ran normally on the surface. The estate work continued. The kitchen garden produced its late summer abundance. Samuel came and went with the particular focused energy of a man running interference on several fronts simultaneously. But underneath, Everyone felt the pull of the coming Wednesday, the way you feel a strong current under still water. Eleanor worked on the estate filing system every morning, which Nathaniel understood was partly because it needed doing, and partly because she needed her hands in work she could complete. He did not say this. He understood it without saying it, because he did the same thing. Went to the fields when his mind needed the discipline of a task with clear endpoints. On the third evening, they sat on the porch after supper. Not something either of them had done before, but the heat had been relentless, and the porch caught what little moving air there was. And Margaret was inside, and Samuel had gone to town, and it was just the two of them, and the sound of the summer night. Eleanor said, "Tell me what you're afraid of." He looked at her. "Regarding the hearing?" "Regarding any of it." I was quiet for a moment. He thought about deflecting. He had a 17-year practice of deflecting, and it sat ready in him the way old habits sit. Always available, always easier than the alternative. "That the board rules against us, and Mercer uses it to keep coming," he said. "Not for my sake. I can sustain a legal campaign. The estate can sustain it." He paused. "I'm afraid of what a sustained campaign costs you. Your ability to work. Your ability to move freely in this county without his shadow following you." He looked at her in the evening dark. "I'm afraid that I brought this on you by opposing him the first time, and that opposing him harder will compound it." She was quiet for a moment. "That is," she said, "a fair fear." "Yes. It's also not yours to carry alone." "Eleanor." "It is not," she said firmly. "Yours to carry alone. I was here before you opposed him the second time. You told me what you were going to do. I didn't ask you to stop." She looked at him directly. "We are in this together, or we are doing something that isn't what either of us said it was in the kitchen garden." He held her gaze. "Together," he said. "Together," she confirmed. "Which means your fears are mine to know about, and mine are yours." A pause. "What are you afraid of?" She looked at the dark beyond the porch for a moment. "That I'm good enough at self-sufficiency that I'll reach for it automatically when things get hard. Even when I don't need to." She said it quietly. "Even when someone is right there." A pause. "I've been alone a long time, Nathaniel. Not unhappily. But it leaves a particular shape in you, and I'm afraid that shape will make me smaller than you need. Smaller than this deserves." He was very still. "Eleanor," he said, "you have been sitting in my house for 3 weeks. You have reorganized 30 years of my family's history, defended your own character in front of the entire county, and just told me a true thing about yourself that most people would never say out loud." He looked at her. "There is nothing small about you. There has not been a single small moment since you got down from that wagon." She was quiet. "The shape your life left in you," he said, "is not a flaw. It's exactly why I trust you." He paused. "It's exactly why this is real. For me." She looked at him for a long moment. The summer night pressed in warm around them. In the distance, something moved in the fields. A deer, probably, or the wind in the high grass. She reached out and put her hand on his arm. He covered it with his. They sat like that, in the summer dark, and neither of them said anything else, because nothing else needed saying. Wednesday came. The county board met in the courthouse building at the center of the valley town, and the room was fuller than a formal hearing typically warranted. Word had traveled. Of course it had traveled. This was Virginia in 1817, and word traveled faster than horses. And the people who had been at the Alderson gathering wanted to see what came next. And the people who hadn't been wanted to see what everyone was talking about. And Harold Mercer had brought his lawyer and his 2 affiliate board members, and the full weight of his considerable local authority. Catherine Alderson sat in the chair's position at the head of the board table with the expression of a woman who had been managing difficult men in formal settings for 40 years and found it mildly tedious but entirely within her capacity. Mercer's lawyer spoke first. He was good, professionally smooth, with the particular skill of a man who understood that you didn't need to prove your client was innocent. You only needed to make the opposing case feel uncertain. He presented the complaint with precision. He used the word orchestrated 4 times. He used the phrase personal interest 3 times. He suggested, without stating, that a woman of limited means in proximity to a man of significant property created an obvious question about whose interests were actually being served. I was careful never to say anything specific enough to be directly refuted. When he finished, Catherine Alderson said, "Miss Bennet?" Eleanor stood. She did not have a lawyer. Nathaniel had offered one, had pressed the point twice, and she had declined both times. "A lawyer," she had told him, "presents a case. I am going to give testimony. Those are different things." She stood in front of the board, and she looked at each member in turn, including the 2 Mercer affiliates, without any particular hostility, and without any performance of confidence either. Just the direct, level attention she brought to things she meant to do thoroughly. "I came to the Whitmore estate on the 14th of July, she said. "I was hired to catalog a library that had been unorganized for 30 years. I worked 6 days a week, primarily between the hours of 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening. I produced 4 cataloging notebooks documenting every document I handled, every decision I made, and every item I classified." She put the notebooks on the table. "Mr. Mercer alleged that I copied financial records and gathered information about the estate's property value." She opened the first notebook to the relevant section. "This is the record of every document I handled. The survey records from 1789 and 1803, the Bennett family botanical journals, the correspondence with the county registrar. I invite any member of this board to identify a financial record among them." Silence. The complaint also alleges that the Alderson gathering was an orchestrated attack on Mr. Mercer's reputation. She looked at Catherine Alderson directly. "Mrs. Alderson arranged the gathering and set its agenda. I presented documented evidence of my work in response to a public accusation. The accusation was made first by Mr. Mercer at a dinner he hosted to 12 families." She paused. "Responding to a public accusation with documented evidence is not an attack, it is a reply." One of the Mercer affiliates, a heavy-set man named Borden, who had the look of someone deeply uncomfortable with the direction things were heading, said, "The complaint raises a question about the nature of your relationship with Mr. Whitmore." "Yes," Eleanor said, "it does." The room went very quiet. "I will answer that question directly," she said. "Mr. Whitmore and I have formed a personal attachment. That is true. It developed over the course of my employment, and it is genuine. It is also entirely separate from my professional conduct, which predates that attachment, is documented in 4 notebooks, and has not been compromised by it in any measurable way." She looked at Borden steadily. "If forming a personal attachment while conducting professional work were disqualifying, the majority of people in this county would need to review the circumstances of their own marriages." A sound went through the room. Not quite laughter. Something adjacent to it. Mercer's lawyer was on his feet. "The nature of the attachment is precisely what—" "Mr. Mercer's lawyer will have his opportunity to respond," Catherine Alderson said, in the tone of a woman who had not been interrupted successfully in 40 years and did not intend to start now. The lawyer sat. Eleanor continued, "I am not here to defend my personal life to this board. I am here to address a professional accusation, which I have done, with documentation. If this board finds the documentation insufficient, I would ask that they identify specifically which entry in which notebook they find wanting." She looked at the notebooks on the table. "I'll wait." The silence was long. Borden looked at the notebooks. He did not reach for them. The third board member, a quiet man named Hargrove, who had said nothing yet and whom Eleanor had studied carefully in the 6 days of preparation, leaned forward. "Miss Bennet," he said, "the 1789 survey you mentioned, the one that documented a prior Mercer boundary dispute." "Yes, sir." "You found that in the course of normal cataloging work?" "Yes, it was filed between a 1788 agricultural ledger and a collection of seed correspondence. I noted it because the county registrar annotation was unusual. It indicated a formal dispute resolution, which is rare to find preserved in a private collection." Hargrove looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at Mercer. "Harold," he said, "did you know that document existed when you filed the land complaint?" The room held its breath. Mercer's lawyer put a hand on Mercer's arm. Mercer said, "I was advised that the boundary evidence would be unclear." Unclear, Hargrove repeated. Or you were advised it was unlikely to be found quickly. He sat back. Because it had been sitting in an uncatalogued library for 30 years. He looked at Eleanor. And then someone catalogued it. Yes, sir, Eleanor said. Hargrove looked at Catherine Alderson. Something passed between them. The shorthand of two people who had been on the same board for a long time and had just arrived at the same conclusion from different directions. I've heard enough, Hargrove said. The board voted 3-2 to dismiss the complaint. The two Mercer affiliates voted as expected. Borden and his counterpart, by the name of Wills, voted to sustain, their faces arranged into the expressions of men doing what they'd been asked to do and not enjoying it. Hargrove, Alderson, and the fifth member, a woman named Cecilia Marsh, who had listened to the entire proceeding with her hands folded and her eyes sharp and said, at the moment of the vote, simply, dismiss, without elaboration, voted to dismiss. 3-2. It was not a rout. It was not a comprehensive humiliation of the kind that would silence Mercer permanently. But it was a decision by the county board, on the record, that the complaint had no merit. And that was a different kind of document than a social gathering, one that lived in the official record, dated and filed and retrievable by anyone who needed to find it. Mercer left without speaking to anyone. His lawyer left behind him. The room broke into the kind of conversation that follows a decision people have been waiting for. Nathaniel was shaking Hargrove's hand. Samuel was talking to Prescott. Catherine Alderson had descended from the chair position and was speaking with Cecilia Marsh in the low, efficient way of women who have many other things to accomplish today. Eleanor stood at the board table and put the 4 cataloging notebooks back into her leather bag, one by one, the way she had carried them in. She was doing this when she heard the voice at her elbow. Miss Bennet. She turned. It was Borden, one of the two who had voted against her. He was not comfortable. He had the look of a man carrying something he needed to set down. I want to say something, he said. She waited. I owed Mercer a vote. I gave it. He said it plainly. But I read the notebooks, before the hearing. I requested them from Mr. Whitmore's office 2 days ago. He looked at her. They were exactly what you said they were. Every entry, every date. He paused. I voted the way I voted because of an obligation, not because I believed the complaint. She held his gaze for a moment. Thank you for telling me, she said. It doesn't change the vote, he said. I know. She looked at him steadily. But it changes what you are. And I think you know the difference. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Once, short, with the dignity of a man who had at least been seen clearly, and walked away. She watched him go. She thought about what it costs to owe someone a thing and pay it even when you know it's wrong. And she thought it was a particular kind of human failure that deserved acknowledgement even if it didn't deserve forgiveness. Nathaniel was beside her. She hadn't heard him come over. Borden, he said. He read the notebooks before the hearing, she said. He voted against us anyway. I know. A pause. Are you all right? She thought about this question. She took it seriously, the way she took most things. Yes, she said. I am. She picked up the leather bag. It was 3-2, Nathaniel, in a room where 2 of the votes were already bought. That means every persuadable person was persuaded. She looked at him. That's not a loss. That's the best possible outcome of an imperfect situation. He looked at her for a moment. You're remarkable, he said. I'm practical, she said. There's a difference. In your case, he said. I'm not sure there is. Margaret was waiting on the porch when they returned. She looked at their faces as the carriage came up the drive, and she read the result before anyone spoke. The way she read most things, from the quality of the silence and the particular way bodies carried either weight or relief. 3-2, she said, when they reached the steps. 3-2, Nathaniel confirmed. She nodded. She looked at Eleanor. Come sit with me, she said. Nathaniel and Samuel went inside. Eleanor sat in the chair next to Margaret's on the porch, and they were quiet for a moment together, the two of them, in the late afternoon that was beginning to cool toward evening. "He'll stop now," Margaret said. "Not because he's finished being angry, but because there's nothing left to file. The land complaint is resolved. The character complaint is dismissed. Any further action becomes harassment, and Prescott will not tolerate harassment." She paused. "He's lost. He knows he's lost. Men like that go quiet when they've lost, because making more noise only confirms the loss." "I know," Eleanor said. "You're not surprised." "No." Margaret looked at her sideways. "You've dealt with men like Mercer before." "Different versions," Eleanor said. "Same structure." She was quiet for a moment. "Men who cannot tolerate a woman who doesn't need their approval. Who take the not needing as a personal offense." She paused. "They're tiresome, but they're manageable, given time and documentation." Margaret made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh. A real one. The kind that belonged to a woman who had been young once, and had known her share of men like Mercer, and had outlasted every one of them. "I like you very much," Margaret said. "I want you to know that. Not as a prospective granddaughter. As a person. You are exactly the kind of woman I wished I had been more of, when I was your age." Eleanor looked at her. "What kind is that?" "The kind who knows the difference," Margaret said, "between what she's owed and what she's willing to fight for, and fights accordingly." She paused. "Most women of my generation were taught to accept what they were given. You were taught the same, I imagine. You simply didn't." "My grandmother," Eleanor said, after a moment. "She was the one who showed me the difference. She ran the lending library in Staunton for 30 years. She used to say, that a book without a reader is just paper and glue, that things only become what they are when someone pays proper attention to them." A pause. "I think about that a great deal. In the work." "And outside of it?" Eleanor looked toward the fields. "Yes," she said. "Outside of it too." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "He's been waiting a long time," she said. Not as a pressure, just as a fact, offered plainly. "Not for a woman to marry. For someone to pay attention to the right thing." She glanced at Eleanor. "I suspect you know what I mean." "I think I do," Eleanor said. They sat together in the early evening, the old woman and the young one, in the comfortable silence of two people who understand each other well enough that the silence is full rather than empty. It was Samuel who told the story afterward, for years, to anyone who would listen, with the particular relish of a man who had been present at something he knew was worth telling. He told it at the table, at the feed store, at the church social, at any gathering where the name Whitmore came up, and someone asked the inevitable question about how the richest man in the valley had finally come to his senses. He told it this way. The library cataloging was finished in the first week of September. All 4 notebooks complete, the estate records organized, the filing system rebuilt from the ground up on principles that would outlast all of them by decades. The work was done. Eleanor Bennett did not leave, not because Nathaniel asked her to stay, though he had, plainly and without performance, on the porch on the last evening of August, with the summer finally beginning to turn toward fall, and the air coming off the mountains with the first edge of coolness in it. Not because Margaret maneuvered or arranged or made the alternative seem impossible, though Margaret had certain thoughts about how the east bedroom should be prepared and was not shy about expressing them. Eleanor stayed because she chose to. Because she had looked at the man and the house and the valley and the complicated, imperfect, ongoing work of building a real life in a real place with a real person, and she had decided that this was the thing worth doing. She stayed. The wedding was small. Deliberately, stubbornly small. Eleanor's insistence, and Nathaniel's relief, because neither of them had the slightest interest in performing something they had already, privately and honestly, already decided. The church at the edge of the valley. A Tuesday morning in October. Margaret in the front pew, with her hands folded and her eyes bright and her posture as impeccable as it had been for 81 years. Samuel beside her, unable to stop smiling. Judge Prescott, Mrs. Patton, Hargrove and his wife, Cecilia Marsh, A handful of others who had been present at the important moments and earned their place at this one. No Mercer. No Borden. No one who had stood on the wrong side of any of it. Eleanor wore a dress the color of the Virginia sky in October, a blue that had nothing fancy about it and everything right. She carried no flowers. She walked in on her own because she had told Nathaniel that she had walked her own road to this point, and she intended to walk it all the way to the altar. And he had said, without hesitation, "Good," because he understood that this was who she was, and he had chosen who she was. She reached him at the front of the church, and he looked at her the way he had looked at the Jefferson Almanac the first time she'd put it in his hands, like something that was genuinely worth looking at. She looked at him the way she had looked at him from the first day, like he was a man standing in his own library. Not a destination, not a name on a gate, a man. The minister spoke the words. They said what needed to be said. Short, specific, meant. And when it was done, and they turned to face the small room full of people who mattered, Nathaniel Whitmore, who had refused 17 women, who had built 300 acres of fences around himself, who had spent the better part of a decade being looked at like a destination, felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for longer than he could clearly remember. Not the estate, not the accomplishment, not the relief of a problem resolved. Just this, just real. Outside the church, in the October air, Samuel clapped him on the shoulder and said, 17. Don't, Nathaniel said. 17 women, and you found the one in your own library. She found the library, Nathaniel said. I was just in the house. You were just in the house, Samuel repeated, savoring it. I'm telling that story forever. I know you are. Eleanor appeared at Nathaniel's side, her hand finding his arm in the easy, unconscious way of something that had already become natural. She looked at Samuel. Whatever you're planning to tell forever, she said, make sure you tell it right. I always tell it right, Samuel said. You tell it memorably, she said. Those are not the same thing. Nathaniel laughed, the real kind, and Eleanor heard it and felt it the same way she'd felt it the first time, like water on dry ground. Like a window opened in a room that had been closed too long. Margaret was the last to leave the church. She stood in the doorway a moment, looking at her grandson and the woman beside him, watching the particular easy, honest way they stood together, not performing anything, not managing anything, just present. And she thought of all the years of careful patience, all the introductions, and the quiet watching, and the long investment of an old woman's faith in a young man she loved. She had known, from the morning Eleanor arrived with her worn leather bag and walked past the richest man in Virginia without asking who he was. She had known from the first Monday, when Mrs. Patton told her about the pre-dawn arrival and the argument with the Latin manuscript. She had known. She stepped out into the October morning and looked at the valley she had lived in for 60 years, and she thought about all the things that only become what they are when someone pays proper attention to them. And she thought, well, there it is. Years later, when people asked Samuel how it had happened, how the man who refused 17 women had finally said yes, or how the woman who wanted nothing from anyone had agreed to stay, he always told them the same thing. He said, she came to do a job. She did it completely. And in doing it completely, she saw what was actually in the house, not what it was worth, not what it cost, not what it represented to the county and the valley and the long line of Whitmore names stretching back into Virginia history. She saw the man who lived in it, the one who drove fence posts when he needed to think, who sat still in a library because it was the closest he could get to something he didn't have words for, who had refused 17 women not from pride or coldness, but from a bone-deep refusal to be seen as less than he was. She saw him, and that was the whole story. Everything else, the complaint and the hearing and the notebooks and the October wedding in the small church at the edge of the valley, was just what happened around the edges of that one true thing. A woman paid proper attention to something that had been waiting a long time to be seen clearly. And what she saw was worth everything she had to give. That was enough. That had always been enough. That would always be enough. And it was.